Welcome anybody to Flat Earth Nation. Mudflood was Armageddon. Mudflood was Armageddon. Don't let them tell you anything else unless they're willing to debate you in a fair and honest way. What a beautiful spirit-filled, time of teaching and learning last night, sharing in the comments. And it lasted, what did we go until 11 o'clock last night? From like around 8 o'clock till 11 o'clock. Happy Sunday, all. Happy Lord's Day, Bobby Marley. And I was wondering last night, you know, tomorrow's the Lord's Day. I want to preach. What am I going to do? I mean, everything new, I laid it out last night and the Holy Spirit was leading. It was wonderful. And within 10 minutes, the Lord answered my prayer by not only showing me what's the message going to be about, he showed me new insight into what I've been claiming is our battery operated magnetic analemma Mobius strips, an infinite amount spinning in a swastika. And it all became true. And tying it into history and thinking I'm going to be able to explain it. And that's nice. Forgive me for monkeying around on my phone. Lord willing, within minutes, there'll maybe half a dozen of people here praising the Lord and learning this information. I did find a part of a rock today. See how well this camera works. That you always see the heart, and we just see the bottom part, and we wonder where those veins go. Well, this is one of the ones that sits on top of the heart, kind of flat on the top, but underneath it would have, one that is exposing, and then another one on the other side of, this skin is the part of the heart. And then, so this is swastika. This part here is swastika. And you can see where it's going into the lung at that point. So it's always spinning on each side of the heart. We've been going over magnets. Let me share the screen. So I think this is pretty good stuff here. Fill them in while I am not looking here. We might come back to that. That was some good stuff. This is one of the ones I left up from last night. Got about this far, knew I was on the right track.
And that's natural because, of course, if you have a manifold, you can triangulate it in many different ways. And so there are many different formal elements I could write, but there's a relation in the plot group, and it's set up exactly in such a way that the moves that you go from one triangulation to the other in the triangulation are exactly the relations that define the plot group. But I won't give the
Oh, how is this going to tie into the Bible? People are going, you're tricking me into this math stuff again. No, I'm not. This is why we're here, not theory. Mobius strips, round, flat, contained fluids in the body, hyperbolic. What is all of this? Doesn't this remind you of how to tie a hog tie knot? I didn't even know how to do that till last night with the Reidmeister move. In mathematical area of knot theory, Reidmeister move is any of three local moves on a linked diagram. Wasn't until 1927, here comes your hidden history again, of when, you know, it's like, oh, it's time to release this now. Knot theory. Twist and untwist in either direction, move one loop completely over the other, move a string completely over or under a crossing. No other part of the diagram is involved. It either is on top, type 1, top 2, or top 3. But you can, in his diagrams, you can always tell which one's on top or where they cross over. Only in 1927, 26 did they learn how to, yeah, let's get on the same page. Not invariant. Here's the unknot. Could be a Mobius strip. Three crossovers. There's only one possibility. With 4 crossovers, there's only one possibility. With 5, there's only one. But this one is 2. 5 crossovers. 6. So these are your primary knots, is what they say. 7 different ways of folding it where it crosses over. There's only 7 different ways of folding a knot where it can cross 7 times. And then they went on from there. Knots invariants, Euler characteristics, all coming down to Knott's Berry Farm. No, I'm just kidding. It's not Knott's Berry Farm. Now remember, all of this was from yesterday. And I'm just hoping that people can hear me right now. FedEx truck has the great German Shepherd Ruger worked up. Ruger, do you want to go in the kennel or do you want to be quiet? Ruger, hey. You want to go to the kennel or you want to be quiet? I'll leave that. It's all good here. 6 people. I hope you're all hearing me good. I wish it wouldn't have been having to get things clear with my man. Well, we'll just go backwards and see. I came to this because I was studying knot theory, and I needed somebody that wasn't going to be questioned by the world if I go, well, I watched this video from that guy. So knot theory really is hard. I'll give him that. I think I couldn't make it much past 40 minutes without doing some brush ups. So I was looking, I'm like, I got to study knots. This looks like a copy and paste. I would never just type in all cap knots. That's a mistake somewhere. Essential knots. I was looking for something to share.
The thing first, I end up with just a circle, what we sometimes call the unknown. But if I try and untangle the others, no matter what I do, I always end up with some knot remaining. This one is called
Tommy's back, so I'm going to help him unload. Go ahead and watch this video.
Like this one of whether 2 different looking knots are true.
You know where the keys are?
My thanks to Brilliant for sponsoring today's video. More about them at the end. A knot like this one is a continuous embedding of a circle into 3-dimensional space, together with the provision that I'm allowed to wiggle it around a little bit. I can't cut it, but otherwise I can maneuver it like you imagine that I could with an actual piece of rope. Then a knot diagram is a projection of this 3-dimensional knot down into a 2-dimensional plane like this one, where it's not quite a projection, because if I take any crossing and zoom in on it, then I want to be clear about which portion of the rope is on the top and which portion is on the bottom, and I just indicate that in my drawing as I've done here. So then the equivalent problem is, if I start with 2 different knot diagrams like this, do they originate from the same knot or from a different knot? Remembering that I could have taken that original knot and moved it around with my finger, projected it perhaps onto a different plane. So it could be the case that these 2 two knot diagrams, despite looking very different, actually started from the same knot. But how could I know? How could I program a computer, for instance, to be able to distinguish?
Let's see what this is. Oh, you know what? This guy has 203,000 subscribers. I probably shouldn't show a long video like that. I should probably try to show one because I'm going to need a few minutes to help Tommy unload. And I don't want to get a strike, so I'm going to show this video instead. Just bear with this for a little bit.
Welcome to the Endless Knot. Let's look at what paying attention to connections can tell us about language, history, and thought. The world is a complicated place. We've all heard the pop culture references to 6 degrees of separation and the Kevin Bacon game, or the butterfly effect, in which chaos theory tells us a butterfly beating its wings can cause a hurricane on the other side of the planet. One way of thinking about these types of things is interconnectivity. Interconnectivity is a property of complex systems, which is a concern not just of scientists and mathematicians, but of social sciences such as economics, sociology, and anthropology. And I think that such an approach is useful for the study of history and culture too. A complex system is any system composed of many interconnected parts in which understanding each individual part doesn't mean you understand the whole system. In colloquial terms, it's more than the sum of its parts. This is a phenomenon called emergence. An obvious example is weather and climate. Perhaps the most notable example of emergence is the mind, which is seen as arising from the complex system of interconnected neurons in the brain. This approach to understanding cognition is known as connectionism. According to this model, human cognition, thought, is the result of the interaction of 100 billion neurons, each of which has several thousand synapses, for a total of several hundred trillion synaptic connections. The overall map of these connections is often referred to as the connectome, perhaps most famously by neuroscientist Sebastian Sung, who advanced the proposition, "I am my connectome," in his notable TED Talk. The idea is that, similar to the way your genome makes you physically who you are, your connectome makes you mentally who you are. According to this hypothesis, the pattern of these connections encodes all your thoughts, memories, and personality. It is because of the vast number of connections in the brain that something as complex as cognition can happen. In addition to general cognition, our brains specifically have the cognitive faculty of language. Unsurprisingly, perhaps, interconnectivity is important in language as well, and some of the cognitive approaches to language are based on this. For instance, in frame semantics, the meanings of words or concepts is structured not like a dictionary, but like an encyclopedia. That is to say, you can't understand a word without also knowing a large variety of related concepts. Thus, to understand the word sell, you have to know a number of related concepts in the domain of financial transactions, such as buyer, money, and so forth. Thus, a word brings up a semantic frame of related knowledge, and it's by this frame that we understand the word. Sometimes a word can belong in more than one frame, and thus have different meanings depending on context. Bank in the context of a river has a very different meaning than bank in the context of money, and you have to have a broad conceptual and cultural understanding to be able to correctly interpret such expressions as a strong man, a strong woman, a strong smell, a strong argument, and so on. Thus, it's the interaction of words that creates meaning. We can picture this as a kind of web of words that collectively produce a meaning not entirely clear from the meaning of the individual words themselves. The world, too, is highly interconnected, as the 6 degrees of separation idea makes clear. You might also be aware of the history of science TV series Connections by James Burke. Burke showed the often surprising lines of influence that drove scientific innovations. This was a direct challenge to the more linear view of history, and in particular the history of science and technology. Instead of progressing in small incremental steps, Burke sees innovation often taking surprising leaps from one seemingly unconnected area to another. So it's interesting to note then that the complex connections inside our heads mirror the complex connections in the world around us. In a sense then, I'd like to explore interconnectivity on 2 levels, the micro level of cognition and language, and the macro level of culture and history, and further, look at how these systems interact, since language, culture, and thought are constantly influencing each other. And it is no surprise, given the interconnected nature of our brains, that we are superb pattern recognition machines, and seem to be driven to seek out patterns in the complex world around us. And given that these historical and cultural connections can often take quite unexpected turns, we have to cast our net quite widely when we're seeking to understand the world. One consequence of this is the need for interdisciplinarity. For those not familiar with the world of academia, universities are generally rigidly divided into a variety of disciplines. At the larger level, there are main groupings such as sciences and humanities, which are further divided into departments such as physics, chemistry, biology, literature, history, and philosophy. There are certainly good organizational reasons for this kind of division, as it allows in-depth interaction within disciplines with others working on similar areas, and puts researchers and students with others of a like mind who might best be able to appreciate their shared material. I suppose ultimately this kind of division goes back to the medieval arrangement of education into what is known as the trivium and quadrivium. The first level, the trivium, with 3 subjects, is what we might now think of as the arts: grammar, rhetoric, and dialectic, that is, logic. The second level, the quadrivium, with 4 subjects, consisted of what we might call the sciences: arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music, that is, theoretical study of harmonics. The word trivium means literally 3 ways, referring obviously to the 3 parts, from Latin tri, 3, and via, way or road, and on a more literal level, the same word was used to refer to a crossroad of 3 streets. From this also comes the modern English word trivial. Now, I'm not suggesting that intense specialization is trivial, but the research produced from increasingly specialized disciplines runs the risk of being appreciated by only a small few who are in the know. Now, this kind of detailed work is very important for advancing and solidifying what we know about the world. Quantum physicists may discover the fundamental operations of reality, or paleographers may determine where a particular medieval manuscript comes from. But sometimes great advances come from the unexpected intersection of different knowledge sets, and because few people can be experts in more than one field, these kinds of perspectives can be missed. Hence, the need for interdisciplinarity, which seeks to make connections across the traditional boundaries. That's the background behind this approach to understanding the world around us and why interconnectivity matters. On a more individual level, interconnectivity is one way our minds organize information, in other words, associative memory, like the memory palace technique, which has received much attention recently, most notably in the recent TV adaptation of the Sherlock Holmes stories. There are other techniques we use too, though, other ways of knowing, such as narrative and metaphor. We tend to think of narrative and metaphor as simply literary techniques, but in fact, they are much more fundamental than that. It turns out that narrative and metaphor are basic tools the mind uses to organize and understand information, but more on that another time. What we're going to do here is start with an approach in part founded on those elements of cognitive science and cognitive linguistics I mentioned before, and use language, literature, and history to explore this web of connections. Many of the videos you'll see on this channel will start with a word as a jumping off point, with its etymology, that is, the word's history and origin, giving us a way to explore history and culture more widely, and then after that, anything's fair game. For the first little while, you'll also see videos which further explore these ways of knowing I mentioned: interconnectivity, narrative, and metaphor. And to highlight the connective nature of these ideas, I'll use what are called concept maps to visualize them, showing the interconnections between different elements. After all, here we are on the internet and the World Wide Web, a vast interconnected world in which we can all dig deep down into our own specialties, but also share with others in a way unprecedented in previous human history. What better place to explore these connections, both old and new? If you have any comments or questions, I'm @alliterative on Twitter, or leave them in the comment section below. You can also read more of my thoughts in my blog. Let's not.
Run out or go try to get them in the mood of like when it comes up. This is all the weed we got left? Oh, I was like, why are you dumping that out? It was already ground up. I thought it was enough. Fucking nasty. I'm recording right now here.
Oh shoot, the video ended. Yeah, I'm here with Tommy, everybody. Hanging out. Just hold on, I realized that video just ended, but we've got big lessons today.
7.
Okay. So, man, thank you all. I hope I might have lost them all. Tommy might have to restart this video. Now, 4 people hung on. Hey, Jenny, thank you guys for hanging on. We're going to be breaking it down where this is going once we get done with introduction to the knots, how they learned how to, just recently, what they call knot theory and how it ties into math and how they've used it. And for me, it's only understanding the cymatic patterns, the analemmas, the Mobius strips that can go in so many different ways, not only for our heavens, but in our bodies, in our hearts. These things are tying in. We're going to be going over scriptures tonight, today, we're going to be looking real hard at this Elohim, real hard, starting with its usage in Joshua 23:7. That reads that you may not mix with these nations among you, or make mention of the names of their Elohim, or swear by them, or serve them, or bow down to them. So that's where we're going. And believe it or not, I am going to be declaring today the Hebrew people as they left Egypt, the sea people, the mythical sea people that rose up out of nowhere, according to all the hieroglyphics in the world, describing how, boom, first they attacked Egypt and everybody else, nobody knew where they came from. Well, today, now you know, that's the second shoe dropping. The Hebrews can be none other than the sea people. Crossing the Red Sea, whatever that was, wherever it was, it's all written down with the histories of the sea peoples, starting with the knots. So as I catch up with Senior Tommy, need to show him my new hat.
That looks just like mine.
No, it's not.
Did you take my Tyler's hat?
No, I didn't. I even got yours
like
out
mine.
there. Your Titleist hat is not embroidered like this, man.
That's like,
Mine was only $3.
look at these.
Just give me 1 second. I gotta tie up this whole situation. Oh my goodness, it's like spaghetti. Those roots went nuts. What was I talking about?
You got it. Spaghetti.
Joshua, knot theory, sea peoples. Wait until you get a little background on who were the sea peoples and how they caused the collapse of the Bronze Age. Boom. Here you go. Second shoe dropping right now.
The end of the world. Predicted thousands of times, but in 1200 BC, it actually Armageddon. The apocalypse. The end of the world. Predicted thousands of times, but in 1200 BC, it actually happened, and no one saw it coming. Some of the greatest civilizations of the age were wiped out in a single generation.
Hey, Tony, did your head have this flag on it?
In ancient civilizations from the 2nd and 3rd millennia BC, it is the Egyptians who occupy the limelight for their dazzling sculpture and art, the hieroglyphics they left behind, the royal tombs, and the incredible architecture, including, of course, the pyramids. In the Egypt of those times, merchants traded exquisitely beautiful vases, now known as chimeras. It was said they came from an island in the middle of the Mediterranean.
Pest Patrol.
Rich,
Well, we were pissing that shit patrol.
the description enticed many Egyptians who wanted to visit. Travelers would change boats in various ports as they moved up the coasts of Lebanon, Cyprus, and the islands of the southern Aegean.
50 minutes. Did he sober up by the end?
One of the first remarkable sights they would encounter was Mount Ida, 8,058 feet high, in the middle of the island of Crete. In the 2nd millennium BC, Crete was the center of a vast domain that encompassed most of the islands in the Aegean. For this reason, the Minoan civilization, named after Minos, the legendary king of Crete, was also called the Aegean civilization. The Minoans lived in a rich and verdant land. In Crete, abundant water flowed down from Mount Ida to irrigate the fields. They were surrounded and defended by the sea, which they sailed as the uncontested masters. They lived in a society without conflicts. And yet, their civilization suddenly disappeared. Archaeologists wondered how a civilization that had left such significant and impressive traces could have come to ruin so quickly and mysteriously.
The real sort of typical home of the kinds of things we're talking about is Mesopotamia, modern Iraq, the Tigris-Euphrates Valley, spreading out beyond Iraq and going out into Syria and places. It too was very similar to the civilization, apparently a little bit newer, in the Nile Valley in Egypt, about which we know a great deal more than we know about the Minoans, because, as you know, in the 19th century, scholars discovered how to read the languages that were written in Egypt and in Mesopotamia, and are able to develop something approaching history for the period we're talking about. That is not true for Crete, because although they had a script, and we have available to us tablets with those writings on them, to this day, no one has deciphered the language written by Minoans, and therefore we don't have that kind of knowledge. In the 19th century, there was a lot of talk about races. And people spoke about the Greek race or similar races for quite a long time. In the science of anthropology and subjects like that, it's been determined that those terms are inappropriate. They suggest there's something in genes that explain the characteristics of particular people. That is certainly not true. So let's understand each other. We're talking about a culture. Let's take Mycenae, which is maybe the best example of the whole culture. Certainly, it's a perfect model for what we're talking about. What you have to begin with is a town or a city or a settlement of some kind built on top of a hill. And it's usually intended to be a formidable hill, one not easily accessible to anybody who comes walking along. A place, in other words, that would make a very nice fort, a citadel. And that's indeed what we find at Mycenae. And on that citadel, on that strongly rocky fort or citadel, they built what we now identify as the royal palace, the palace of the king. And that was, I should point out, maybe about 10 miles from the sea. Now, not all Mycenaean sites are so far from the sea. Some of them are closer, but what is important to say is that none of them are right on the sea. They're always back some few miles. The reason for that, I think, is that in the early times in which these civilizations rose, saw all kinds of dangers coming, and the swiftest, the least suspected, the one that could come up on you overnight, came from the sea. Here we're talking about a wealthy civilization, at least in which the rulers are wealthy, and in which the rulers, of course, are very powerful. These cultures engaged in trade to a significant degree. You find Mycenaean elements, tools, other things, pottery particularly, of certain kinds, all over the Mediterranean Sea. You find it in datable places, and that's why we can give this some kind of date, such as in Egypt. The Mycenaeans had a regular trade with Egypt. You find Egyptian things in Mycenae and vice versa. And also, presumably, much of it must have gone into Mesopotamia. Some of it went all the way to the western Mediterranean. This was a civilization that was not shut in on itself, but was in touch with the entire Mediterranean region. Over the entire Aegean Sea and indeed across the Mediterranean. In the years of the Mycenaean period, roughly from 1600 to 1100 or so BC, you are dealing with a largely unified culture. What is it? When we talk about the world like these days, what's the cliche? globalized world. It was a globalized world, except it was a little piece of the globe.
This is the late Bronze Age, and actually the Bronze Age goes from 3000 to 1000 BC, give or take. And we're in that last part of it. The way you make bronze is I put up here is tin and copper. 90% copper, 10% tin. Most of the copper is used to make bronze at that time. And copper is not a problem. It's coming from Cyprus. In fact, that's where it comes from. Cyprus means bronze. The tin is a little bit more problematic. Possible some came from Cornwall, though I'd rather doubt they got up there more than once in the blue. There are some tin mines in southern Turkey, but not enough. The vast majority came from Afghanistan. So you can see that you've got a trade route of hundreds, if not thousands of miles. If you cut it at any point, you are in trouble. And in fact, a colleague of mine in England has said that for them, tin was like oil is for us. Even the steady flow of tin is the same problem that we've got for oil. I think that's a good analogy. So, we've got this globalized society, trade, reciprocity, diplomacy, everybody's marrying each other's daughters for gold and silver and whatnot. And then into the art chaos.
I hadn't seen her since then.
Problem. They lose the art of writing, they lose the art of large buildings, you get mediocrity. Right, so Mycenaean civilization is considered to end just after 1200. Same with Hittites, same with the Syrians.
That when this culture comes to an end, is accompanied by people getting away from the Mycenaean world. Some of them go only so far as Africa, which has the good fortune somehow of not being destroyed. One of the few important Mycenaean places that is not destroyed. So for some reason it was safe in Africa, and some fled to Africa. Others had to keep going and settled on the islands of the Aegean Sea. For others, it was necessary to go further and to settle the west coast of Asia Minor, which indeed this is the great period of Greek settlement on the west coast of Asia. And then it looks like there came a moment where there was a time where whatever was attempting to overthrow cities and this civilization succeeded. Not the same in every place. The fall of Pylos is generally thought to be around 1200 BC. Mycenae itself, maybe 50 years later, and other places later than that. I think it's very important to notice that some of these places that were big in the Mycenaean world were entirely abandoned and not settled again by the Greeks. Very lost. People didn't even know where they were. That's extraordinary. That only happened to some very, very tribes people from inhabitants.
We get a dark age that lasts for between 150 and 300 years, and basically civilization in this area. Only the Egyptians survived, but it's and then that was their high point. This was a huge loss. It is comparable to the collapse of the Roman Empire, which happened 1,500 years later. The main problem is we're not really sure what caused it. It used to be that it was a very simple explanation. The simple solution was that the sea peoples had done it. When in doubt, the sea peoples. So, who are the sea peoples? Well, this is the Egyptian name for them. The Egyptians, actually, it's our name for them. We call them the sea peoples. The Egyptians talk about a number of different routes coming through the Eastern Mediterranean and winding up in Egypt on the shores, attacking them, not once but twice over a 30-year period. They come in 1207 and they come in 1177. The Egyptians tell us in both reigns, Meneptah and Ramses III, but let me focus on Ramses III here because it's more literally picturesque. He gives us a picture of the invasion and a description of what went on. So he tells us the foreign conspiracy is made, the foreign countries made a conspiracy in islands. All at once the lands were removed and scattered over the prey. No land could stand before their arms. And then he tells us what happens, who they overran. From Hate, Kode, Carthage, Artswa, Lashia, on. And we know where these places are. Hati is Turkey, it's the Hittites. Kode is where Turkey meets Syria. Carthage, northern Syria. Artswa is actually western Turkey, on the coast there. Alashia is the ancient name for Cyprus. So these people are sweeping across from west to east, across Turkey, down the Levant, across Cyprus. They set up a camp in Amor, that's northern Syria. Desolated its people, its land was like that which has never come to being. They were coming forward toward Egypt. Land was prepared before them. And then he actually tells us the name of the peoples. He says their confederation was the Tejeker, the Shekelesh, the Denian, and the Weshesh. So it gives us these quantities. What's going on? 5 right there. There's another 6 that are mentioned. The first time, 7. 2 of them overlap. So there's a total of 9 separate groups that come twice in these 30 years. So, where are they from? What are they doing? What happens to them? Well, we're told part of that. Ramses, in another inscription from a couple years later, he says, I overthrew those who invaded our lands. I slew the Denian, who were in their isles, the Tejeker, the Pelesset, the Ashes, the Shardana, the Weshesh of the sea. They were made as those that exist not. So he beats them. And in fact, Arnepta had beaten them back in 1207 as well. So they come twice, they lose twice, they do not come a third time. That's it. What I would like to do then is to figure out if it's not the sea peoples, then what else would have caused it? So, could it have been drought, like some have suggested? Could it have been famine? Could it have been invaders? Could it have been earthquakes? And the answer to this is yes. I actually think it's all of it. Because you can survive a famine, and you can survive a drought, you can survive invaders, you can survive an earthquake. Yes, lots of people die, but your civilization does not end. What if you have one of them then? If you have a multiplier effect, if you have, and I would call it a perfect storm, that's what I think happens. What Ramsey shows us is that these people that are coming, they're not like Vikings. They're bringing the men. You've got the wife, you've got the kids, you've got the bodies, you've got the ox cart. These are people moving. They're migrating.
What we find after the fall of the Mycenaean world in Greece are some of the following things that were not typically found in the Mycenaean world. First of all, iron weapons. Not bronze. The building of buildings in the shape of what the Greeks called a megaron, a rectangular center which has a hearth in it, a front porch, and a back porch, which will be the style in which Greek temples are built in the historical period. That appeared for the first time after the fall of the Mycenaeans. We know that the Mycenaeans buried their dead by inhumation. Those great outsiders are buried in graves. Whereas in the historical period, these people were cremated. One of the sea peoples that attacked the Nile in around 1200 in Egypt are called the Pelesset. And most scholars suggest that that is the same name as came to be the name for this region. They really called Palestine, and you will remember that when the Bible talks about this, it refers to a people called the Philistines. These are thought to be all the same people.
All that had worked together at Avalon.
Are we facing a situation similar today? Is there climate change? Well, we could argue all night about that, right? But let's say for argument, yes, at least some. Are there famines and droughts in the world today? Yes, of course there are. Earthquakes, yes. Rebellions, yes. I think the only thing that's missing is sea peoples.
set up on the screen and put there's no alcohol. Did you see any of that golf yesterday? And the collapse.
Crazy. Amen. So now we understand and to see people. I'm going to have to apologize. I've been trying to break away from Tommy for 5 minutes, but he just keeps talking. I'm just kidding, Tommy. Let's see if anybody's even here. The collapse. I mean, really, my goodness. Oh, shoot. I wasn't even sharing. And they were trying to call me.
You're kidding.
No, I wasn't even sharing it, Tommy.
How many times have you done that? Why don't you double check? Why don't you have it on your phone so you can look at it?
It is on my phone.
Why?
Because I was working. I was busy.
Why?
Anyway, so we've got this stuff. Did you guys didn't hear it though? We got that part down. Doggone it. Now it's almost like starting over. What I was dealing with was not theory, not N-O-T, K-N-O-T. Oh, wait, it's even in the deal. We're still growing. We're going back up. We're back up from 7 to 9 viewers. I didn't ruin it for everybody. So last night, when we ended up proving that the Quran, their Muslim Bible, is completely fake, and that it was a Aramaic Christian hymnal, we were back on it. People were wondering what possibly, where can we go after last night? It seemed like everything was solved, but everything wasn't solved. There was still that other foot to drop. And that other foot dropped when I studied the knot theory, led me back through, well, I can't say, I want to read Joshua and Judges later. So I was going to try it in, but it led me from knot theory to the math to check this out. We were even going over this earlier before Tommy just got back from a 3-day weekend. And, if I have to interrupt again, I will. And the reason I was distracted because, I was married to a nurse. I consider myself still married while she's continuing in her adultery of living a divorced life that was, you all have heard the story if you've been around, it wasn't me. It's not always the man. And anyway, she's one of these, she's not as high up as Tommy's nurse in the corporate scheme of things, but she's up there in pay because of her ability to code, as she is a nurse programmer. Because one of the things that we saw and jumped into when we still cared about money, my wife and I, because honestly, I could never have studied this. I couldn't have raised up 4 beautiful children without her. And the fact that, it seems to be a leaving and cleaving problem. And I don't care if I focus on my wife a little bit too much like that. Is it another, not a foot to drop? It's a shoe drop. Drop a shoe. I meant that. I know that it's the other shoe that drops. But anyway, Tommy just got back from a wedding, and it's one of these, high up nurses, and they're all married to doctors. And I was curious. I was going like, what was the wedding like and the party afterwards? And he started telling it. Sure enough, they're always so funny when those, when I hate to say it, but when those nurses and doctors get liquored up. So in those last 20 minutes, I just heard some of the craziest stuff. But in the meantime, here, knot theory, because K-N-O-T, that knot theory spurred my mind so much about the analemas, the Mobius strips, and the possibilities that are mathematically incalculable that God could use as he's preparing these vortexes, the toruses, toroidal fields, and all of these other things. It's one of those things. It's just crazy, right? Because everybody, since this is all brand new, Angela, Angie, I don't know what you like to go by, but young lady, everything's brand new. There was a time when, like, my wife's mother is a nurse, and she was able to get, they live on a very comfortable retirement. They bought a house for $27,000 that sells, if they sell it now on the market at the top now, I think is, $480,000. Their payment on it was $92. And they aren't the greatest generation. They were just given that. She got her nursing, and she was a triage nurse at Lutheran General, and 2-year degree. My wife, it takes getting a bachelor's, a 4-year degree before you can code. And now if you want to go, it's master's. So my mother-in-law with a 2-year degree, how she could have been so high back then was only reset, because it's all brand new. And that's just the way it goes. It's, what's funny is that my mom and dad had 4 children, a girl, boy, girl, girl. And then I had 4 children, girl, boy, girl, girl. And so after having sisters, and then growing up and being a girls basketball coach, girls volleyball coach, along with the 100 wins I got in basketball in the first 5 years, I've been coaching women in softball and stuff all my life. And I have learned 2 things about women. I'll share them with you now. One, even if they're wet, don't splash them in the pool. They don't like it. And if they're nice enough to do your laundry, don't expect them to check your pockets. They're doing your frickin' laundry. You check them first. So that's what there you go. Now that's what I know about women. There's a lot of things the Bible teaches about women that, you can't see it all, but I know those 2 things. So after that, we were looking at the endless knot introduction. I just shared that. You didn't get to see
how these systems interact, since language, culture, and thought are constantly influencing each other. And it is no surprise, given the interconnected nature of our brains, that we are superb pattern recognition machines and seem to be driven to seek out patterns in the complex world around us. And given that these historical and cultural connections can often take quite unexpected turns, we have to cast our net quite widely when we're seeking to understand the world. One consequence of this is the need for interdisciplinarity. For those not familiar with the world of academia, universities are generally rigidly divided into a variety of disciplines. At the larger level, there are main groupings such as sciences and humanities, which are further divided into departments such as physics, chemistry, biology, literature.
It is very nice to be a theologian that doesn't have to worry about, is the Lord going to take care of me? Everything is by the Spirit. I did not time this. I couldn't time this, but I am positive this is by our Holy Spirit, El Elyon, the Most High God.
History and philosophy. There are certainly good organizational reasons for this kind of division, as it allows in-depth interaction with the discipline, with others working on similar areas, and puts researchers and students with others of a like mind who might best be able to appreciate their shared material. I suppose ultimately this kind of division goes back to the medieval arrangement of education into what is known as the trivium and quadrivium. The first level, the trivium, with 3 subjects, is what we might now think of as the arts: grammar, rhetoric, and dialectic, that is, logic. The second level, the quadrivium, with 4 subjects, consisted of what we might call the sciences: arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music, that is, theoretical study of harmonics. The word trivium means literally 3 ways, referring obviously to the 3 parts, from Latin tri, 3, and via, way or road, and on a more literal level, the same word was used to refer to a crossroad of 3 streets. From this also comes the modern English word trivial. Now, I'm not suggesting that tense specialization is trivial, but the research produced from increasingly specialized disciplines runs the risk of being appreciated by only a small few who are in the know. Now, this kind of detailed work is very important for advancing and solidifying what we know about the world. Quantum physicists may discover the fundamental operations of reality, or paleographers may determine where a particular medieval manuscript comes from. But sometimes great advances come from the unexpected intersection of different knowledge sets, and because few people can be experts in more than one field, these kinds of perspectives can be missed. Hence the need for interdisciplinarity, which seeks to make connections across the traditional boundaries. That's the background behind this approach to understanding the world around us and why interconnectivity matters. On a more individual level, interconnectivity is one way our minds organize information. In other words, associative memory, like the memory.
Look at those nerve endings. I see them on maps in the old world all the time.
This technique, which has received much attention recently, most notably in the recent TV adaptation of the Sherlock Holmes stories. There are other techniques we use too, though, other ways of knowing, such as narrative and metaphor. We tend to think of narrative and metaphor as simply literary techniques, but in fact, they are much more fundamental than that. It turns out that narrative and metaphor are basic tools the mind uses to organize and understand information, but more on that another time. What we're going to do here is start with an approach in part founded on those elements of cognitive science and cognitive linguistics I mentioned before, and use language, literature, and history to explore this web of connections. Many of the videos you'll see on this channel will start with a word as a jumping off point, with its etymology, that is the word's history and origin, giving us a way to explore history and culture more widely, and then after that, anything's fair game. For the first little while, you'll also see videos which further explore these ways of knowing I mentioned, interconnectivity, narrative, and metaphor. And to highlight the connective nature of these ideas, I'll use what are called concept maps to visualize them, showing the interconnections between different elements. After all, here we are on the internet and the World Wide Web, a vast interconnected world in which we can all dig deep down into our own specialties, but also share with others in a way unprecedented in previous human history. What better place to explore these connections, both old and new? If you have any comments or questions, I'm @alliterative on Twitter, or leave them in the comment section below. You can also read more of my thoughts at my blog, The Endless Knot.
That sounds pretty cool, man. He's got all that endless knot stuff going on. I think we can be blessed right now. Right now. Where does magic come from? Why is English spelling so complicated? He keeps showing that Sutton helmet. He has it hanging on behind him when he's talking too. He must really like that. Yikes.
Welcome to The Endless Knot. In honor of Valentine's Day, today's word is cuckold, a word all about understanding and misunderstanding nature. The word cuckold is used to refer to a man whose wife has cheated on him, and generally speaking, he knows nothing about the infidelity while everyone around him does. The word isn't as common as it once was, but no doubt adultery is as common as ever. However, the term does seem to have gained a new, if restricted lease on life, in more recent years in reference to the sexual fetish in which the cuckold derives sexual gratification from the...
Don't start thinking of Jerry Falwell Jr. See, there's a word for that. You know what it is? Put it in the comments.
Knowledge of his partner's infidelity. The word cuckold is first recorded in English in the medieval poem The Owl and the Nightingale, a debate between two birds about which of them is better. The connection between cuckolds, birds, and bird debates will come back later, by the way. Anyways, the perhaps surprising etymology of the word arises from a long-standing knowledge of natural science. Cuckold is from the name of the cuckoo bird, with the addition of a pejorative suffix. Many species of cuckoo birds practice what's called brood parasitism, laying their eggs in the nests of other birds so that those other birds have to do all the work of raising the chicks. As the young cuckoos grow, they often push their smaller brothers and sisters out of the nest, killing them. So the use of the word to refer to a man who doesn't know he has an unfaithful wife is an analogy, since a cuckold might be raising another man's kids as his own. The word cuckoo itself is imitative of the call of the bird and comes into English from a similar French word, or ultimately from Latin cuculus, and replaces the earlier Old English word for the bird, yak. The word cuckold is now most associated with the literature of the late Middle Ages and Renaissance, used by writers such as Geoffrey Chaucer and William Shakespeare. In addition to the animal imagery of a bird, the other frequent animal image associated with the concept is the cuckold's horns, which are sometimes used figuratively in the literature, or even literally in images or in stage productions of the time. But where does this symbol of marital infidelity come from? Well, no one knows for sure, but there are many theories. For instance, it might just be a sarcastic use of the horns or antlers of very macho animals such as rams or stags, since for these animals, large horns or antlers are important markers of mating status and competition for females, hence the slang term horny. The idea is that these very masculine symbols are applied ironically to men whose manhood has been undermined by their wives' cheating. Alternately, some have suggested it could be a reference to a Byzantine emperor, Andronikos I, who is said to have affixed horns to the houses of the women he slept with, to indicate that their husbands could receive special hunting privileges in compensation. Though the contemporary sources just say he put a gigantic stag's antlers in the marketplace to show off his conquests and mock local husbands. Or it might be an allusion to the Greek myth of Actaeon, who, after catching sight of the goddess Artemis naked, is transformed into a stag, thus symbolic of the undermining of the male sexual prerogative. Perhaps the most surprising theory is that it relates to capons, roosters who have been castrated to increase their fattiness and thus improve their flavor. There was apparently a practice of cutting off the bony spurs from the feet of these castrated birds and then grafting the spurs onto the open wounds on their head where their coxcombs, the fleshy ridges that normally grow there, had also been cut off. Apparently, the reattached spurs continue to grow there, producing something that looks very much like an antler, which marks the birds out and makes it easier to spot in the flock. This then would also be an appropriate symbol to mark a man whose wife has cheated on him, who in these patriarchal societies was considered equally emasculated. While this explanation may seem outlandish, it's been pointed out that the German word for couple, Hahnreit, originally meant capon, and is a compound meaning literally rooster deer. In any case, however it happened, the horns have become so associated with adultery that to this day the hand gesture of the horns is, in many places, a very insulting gesture that implies a man's wife has cheated on him, and he's a fool for not knowing it. This may also have led to the now somewhat more benign hand gesture of the bunny ears, frequently used as a joke in photographs, both made behind the head of the unwitting victim, though it's also been suggested that the bunny ears represent an ass's ears, in a basic symbol of foolishness. The two gestures may have merged here, and the bunny ears seem to have been used in the form of Italian drama called commedia dell'arte to indicate cuckoldry. Incidentally, this symbol is also the source of the distinctive jester's hat, which features the stylized representation of ass's ears, horns, or coxcombs. The jester's hat is also known as a fool's cap, a word that eventually comes to refer to a size of paper, supposedly due to a watermark featuring the image of a jester. Fool's cap was then misunderstood as foolscap. As a final side note, the office of the court jester in England was apparently nixed by noted buzzkill Oliver Cromwell, after he and his Puritan cronies executed King Charles I. Oh, Cromwell, you joyless man, first Christmas, then jesters. But returning to the cuckoo for a moment, the word is first attested in English in the famous 13th century Middle English cuckoo song, which begins, Summer is icumen in, lude sing cuckoo. Summer here probably refers to spring, actually, with the plants starting to grow again and the animals mating. The word spring isn't attested until a little later, though there were a variety of other terms that could be used to refer to the season. Birdsong is naturally enough associated with the arrival of spring. Another famous Middle English poem uses the association of birds and spring, Geoffrey Chaucer's Parliament of Fowls, which describes the gathering of all the birds on Valentine's Day to pick their mates. When a disagreement erupts about which male eagle gets the choice female eagle, presumably quite the haughty by bird standards, all the birds argue it out Parliament style. The cuckoo is also one of the birds in Chaucer's poem, though his rather selfish opinion on the love debate receives scorn, and he is characterized as unnatural because of that whole brood parasite tendency. The poem is a kind of animal allegory for the courtly love tradition and the ins and outs of love and marriage. The strange thing is, February 14th is a rather early date for birds to start mating, even in the relatively mild climate of England. A number of solutions to this problem have been suggested, such as the discrepancy between our modern calendar and the one used at the time, which would have put Valentine's Day somewhat later, or the suggestion that Chaucer might have been confused between two different St. Valentines, the more obscure one celebrated instead in early May. One way or the other, contrary to the many claims you may have heard, Chaucer's poem seems to be the first association between St. Valentine's Day and romantic love. So if you're finding it hard to get into a romantic mood when it's still rather cold outside, you can probably blame Chaucer and some kind of...
You know, that was very interesting. It made me want to see his video on the Yule.
How did we get from a Christian holy day marking the birth of Christ to a celebration involving evergreen trees, feasting and drinking, and reindeer? Welcome to the Endless Knot. Today we look at the word Yule. Before it was co-opted to refer to Christmas, the Germanic word Yule meant the month-long holiday coinciding with the winter solstice, and specifically the pagan midwinter fertility festival. The word Yule comes from the Old English Yule and is related to other Germanic words like the Old Norse Yule. We don't know for sure where this Germanic root comes from, but it might come from an Indo-European word yak, which means to speak, and also gives us words such as joke, juggle, and jewel, probably through association with festivity. Or it could come from an Indo-European word quell, which means to turn or move around, and also gives us words such as wheel and cycle, probably referring to the turn of the year that happens at Yule. From Old Norse Yule also possibly comes jolly through Old French jolie, meaning pretty or cute, unless that comes from Latin gaudere, to rejoice, or maybe both sources are at play here. What is certain, though, is that Clement Clarke Moore famously refers to Santa Claus as a jolly old elf in the poem commonly known as The Night Before Christmas. The combination of the words jolly and elf, also from a Germanic root, starts us down the road to the Germanic origins of so many modern English and North American Christmas traditions. All because the early church decided to mash up Christ's birthday with midwinter festivals. If you hear the word Yule today, it might be in the phrase Yule log, a particularly large log traditionally saved for burning at Christmas, or a kind of log-shaped Christmas cake. It's been suggested that the traditional burning of the Yule log has its roots in early Germanic pagan ritual. Trees seem to have been a big deal in early Germanic belief. For instance, when describing the Germanic people, the Roman historian Cassius writes about the importance of particular types of wood and sacred groves as places of worship, and the Norse cosmology is based around the image of the world tree Yggdrasil. This emphasis on trees, also important to early Celts, seems to have survived in England from the time of the earliest Germanic peoples who settled there. We see this also in the tradition of Christmas decorations with evergreens such as Christmas wreaths, mistletoe, and holly, all symbolically appropriate for a midwinter fertility festival, since evergreens stay green through the winter months. Christmas trees, too, seem to come from Germanic pagan roots, but aren't from that continuous English tradition. The Christmas tree was popularized much later in the Victorian period by Prince Albert, the German-born husband of Queen Victoria, after having been imported a little earlier by other German-born members of the British royal family. And then there's the traditional Christmas ham, a custom that goes back to the Germanic Yule boar. The boar was associated with the Norse fertility god Freyr, and it was customary to sacrifice a boar as part of the pagan Yule celebrations to ensure fertility in the coming year. This is reflected in the song The Boar's Head Carol. Slaughtering most of your livestock before winter, of course, makes good sense, since then you don't have to feed them all when food is scarce, and a new set of animals will be born in the spring. No wonder people often have a large feast at that time of year, like our over-the-top Christmas dinners. So when you have to loosen your belt 2 notches over the holidays, you can blame those old Germanic pagans. Wassailing, now most familiar in the Christmas carol Here We Come A-Wassailing, also seems to have roots in an Anglo-Saxon fertility tradition. Wassail, the drink, is similar to mulled ale or apple cider, and wassailing, which is now commonly used to mean the practice of Christmas carol singing from door to door, also refers to the ritual of singing in apple orchards to scare away evil spirits and ensure a good apple harvest the next year. The toast itself, wassail, is from the Anglo-Saxon was thou hau, meaning be thou hail, or in other words, be healthy. But getting back to the word Yule, Nordic countries have a tradition of the Yule goat, called a Julebak in Scandinavian countries, or Julepuki in Finland, which might involve constructing a large straw goat or dressing up in a goat costume to go wassailing or give out gifts. Though the modern version of Santa Claus has largely replaced the goat man, Finns still use the term Julepuki to refer to the guy in the red suit. The Yule goat may have its origins in the two goats that were said to pull the chariot of Thor, the Norse thunder god, and this may also have inspired the reindeer who pull Santa's sleigh. And remember, two of the reindeer are named Donner and Blitzen, which mean thunder and lightning. Incidentally, the term Yulebok or Yulepuki is etymologically the same as Yulebuk, and buck comes from an old Germanic word for a male deer or goat. Bock is a type of lightly hopped lager beer that is commonly associated with festive occasions, particularly Christmas. It's called Bock because originally it comes from a German town called Einbeck, which, when pronounced with a Bavarian accent, sounds like Ein Bock, meaning a goat. And so, beer labels on bottles of Bock often feature a picture of a goat, particularly appropriate given the Christmas association. But getting back to Santa's reindeer and Norse mythology, the chief god Odin rode his eight-legged horse called Sleipnir in the Scandinavian version of the Wild Hunt, a widespread European myth involving ghostly huntsmen on horseback riding wildly through the sky, and this is an element of the Germanic pagan Yule festival. Thus, Odin's eight-legged horse may have led to Santa's eight reindeer, and Odin, who is sometimes known by the name Mjolnir, or Yule figure, and often depicted as an old man with a white beard and hat and cloak, may have influenced our modern image of Father Christmas or Santa Claus, in combination with the Old English tradition of Old Father Time, as well as the Mediterranean gift-giving St. Nicholas. Yeah, it's all a little complicated. Okay, back to Odin and the Wild Hunt. In Germanic pagan tradition, Yule is a time of supernatural occurrences and is connected with the cult of the dead and ancestor worship. Odin is, appropriately enough, a god of the dead, and this association with Yule may to some extent carry over to Christmas in the tradition of the Christmas ghost story. Think Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol with its ghosts of Marley and of Christmas past, present, and yet to come. Dickens is almost single-handedly responsible for the revival of Christmas as a major public holiday, well, along with the popularizer of the Christmas tree, fellow Victorian Prince Albert. Remember him? Before the Victorian period, Christmas was in decline and not particularly popular. In fact, in what was the real war on Christmas, Oliver Cromwell and his party pooper Puritan pals tried to stamp out Christmas, as did many of the early Puritan colonies in North America, passing laws forbidding its celebration and requiring shops to stay open, since they saw all that feasting and drinking and celebrating.
And I think that could be tied into the commandments to stop with the worshiping of the Nicolaitans, Saint Nicholas. It's all tying into that time. We're going to go into the collapse of the Bronze Age. When was that?
That's rather too pagan. Well, as you can see, they weren't wrong. But then, where did Dickens's version of snowy, festive Christmases come from? Well, oddly enough, we have a volcano to thank for that. In 1815, Mount Tambora in Indonesia had an enormous volcanic eruption which drastically affected world climate, making the following years remarkably cooler than usual. With the so-called year without a summer in 1816, and at least 8
We've all studied this, and you know it in our Egypt, the United States, as the New Madrid in 18. That was all the same time period, but they have it wrong by 100 years. It was 1711.
Snowy winters in a row in England, not a common occurrence. As a result, winters for young Charles, who was born in 1812, involved the iconic white Christmases that set the tone for his Christmas writings, like A Christmas Carol. Another literary outcome of the Mount Tambora eruption, by the way, was the cool and rainy summer in Switzerland in 1816, where Percy and Mary Shelley, Lord Byron, and his personal physician John Polidori were holidaying. The miserable weather meant they stayed indoors a lot, and this led to them having a ghost story writing contest, which ultimately led to Mary's famous novel Frankenstein. And what could be more Christmassy than reanimated corpses, right? Well, oddly enough, maybe, according to Germanic mythology. In Old Norse stories such as Saga, it is said that the activity of Draugr increases around Yule. The Draugr were the walking dead, a bit like ghosts but more corporeal, so maybe more like zombies. They dwelt in their burial mounds and sometimes came out to make trouble for the living, attacking their homes and so forth, particularly at Yule. In another Old Norse saga, King Hrolf's saga, one of King Hrolf's warriors, named Bodvar Bjarki, fights off some kind of winged monster which always attacks the king's hall at Yule. This battle, along with the troll fight described in Saga, are often held up as remarkably close parallels to the fight between Beowulf and Grendel in the famous Anglo-Saxon poem. Though Grendel's attacks aren't specifically at Yule, as are the other monsters' attacks, Grendel does perhaps have a role to play in one of our modern Christmas stories, Dr. Seuss's How the Grinch Stole Christmas. Like the Old Norse monsters, the Grinch comes to the settlement at Christmas/Yule. Like Grendel and the Old Norse monsters, he comes at night. And the attacks of both the Grinch and Grendel are triggered by the sound of people singing and happily celebrating in their community, while the Grinch/Grendel is left friendless out in the cold wilderness. Even their names, Grinch and Grendel, sound similar, so perhaps Dr. Seuss was inspired by the Vicar of Grendel, as well as by Dickens's Christmas-hating character Scrooge, in creating his iconic Grinch.
So, as we approach the season of Yule, don't be a Grinch, or a Scrooge or a Grendel, and join me in raising a cup of wassail or a bottle of Bock to the...
Look, I did all caps. Nothing.
The more that you watch, the more things you will know.
I felt because he had had almost no experience with them.
Despite the fact that he will go down in history as one of the most prolific authors of children's books, Dr. Seuss didn't have children of his own. Some sources say
The problem now is future peace. That is your job in Germany.
it isn't widely known that around the time of the Second World War, Dr. Seuss, along with his wife Helen, wrote a documentary called Design for Death, which was released in 1947. It was based on a military training film about Japanese culture that he also wrote, called Our Job in Japan.
Any sensible idea, any modern idea, the Japanese brain, like our brain, can learn when it is taught.
Though at the time it may have been considered to actually be sympathetic to the Japanese, in retrospect it's quite clearly pro-war propaganda. Design for Death went on to win the Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature.
Like I always said, every man his own censor.
Number 7. He was fired for drinking. Not all college students meet the legal drinking age in the United States, but obviously many of them break the too far into the gutter. Let's recall that the word boner has more than one definition and doesn't necessarily have to do with the male anatomy. Another definition is a frivolous error. Dr. Seuss's first ever published book, which came out in 1931, was Boners, a collection of stories written for children that landed itself on the New York Times bestseller list. Not only that, but it spawned a follow-up to actually write some pretty racy adult content. His 1939 book, The Seven Lady Godivas, was about a group of sisters who never wore clothes because, quote, they were simply themselves and chose not to disguise it. The book was a colossal failure, and Seuss blamed himself, saying that he tried to make the Oscar win for his war documentary, but before that he was involved in producing some other pro-war content as well. At the beginning of the war, he started to pen political cartoons for a New York City newspaper called PM. Some of the work he produced at the time was controversial, and in retrospect would be considered propaganda. While he derided racism in many of the images he created, there was at least one instance of him drawing racist depictions of Japanese people and supporting Japanese internment camps. Number 2, his earliest cartoons were racist.
But could this cartoon now chip away at the image of the beloved author?
Before joining the war effort, Ted Geisel had a job at...
Well, let's take a little closer look at this.
Cartoon now chip...
High grade N-word for your wood pile.
Chip away at the image of the beloved author.
Before joining the war effort, Ted Geisel had a job in advertising, where he did work for a company called Standard Oil of New Jersey, later Esso, and their product Flit, a bug spray. Unfortunately, however, many of the cartoons that he created for their ads now seem incredibly racist, featuring images of black and Arab people done in a stereotypical way.
He was a hugely popular.
That later in life, he created children's books that were seemingly opposed to the idea of racism. We have to assume he changed his way. Be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about.
Well, that was interesting stuff, learning there about that. Mathematical coincidence. I do want to say a word about that before we move on. The mathematical coincidence is said to occur when two expressions with no direct relationship show a near equality which has no apparent theoretical explanation. You might know it in your own personal life as coincidences that just too many. Let's see. For example, there are near equality close to the round number 1000 between powers of 2 and powers of 10. Very interesting. You understand, it's just, what is a coincidence? You don't build, you're not supposed to build a world on random coincidence, but we did. Now, we'll be getting more into this later. Elohim and this verse that you may not mix with these nations remaining among you, Joshua 23:7, or make mention of the names of their gods. You might think those are idols or something. You'll be surprised. Or swear by them, their gods, or serve them, their gods, or bow down to them, their gods. Who are they? Are they just simply something that man makes and they're worshiping a pretend thing? No, their gods are Elohim. Exodus 10:7, the Lord their God. Exodus 23:33. For if you serve their gods, their Elohim, that I am the Lord their God that brought them forth out of Egypt. Yahweh was one of those. He was the created. If you have to have the analogy, he was the Zeus of the Council of the Titans, the creator of them all. But it didn't go down. Well, we don't really know what happened among the powers and principalities that ruled. But we do know that the Bible doesn't say, thou shalt have no other gods before me, because there weren't any other gods that they could have said, like the women in Jeremiah 44. Did you know that Egypt got their wish to go back? Pacoism there, right? Is there a, we don't have time to do the gag reel as we go, but they didn't, Egypt didn't go out. It was the Israelites that left Egypt, the Hebrews. They went to the Red Sea and said, this isn't going to work, I want to go back. Did you know that eventually a bunch of Hebrews did go back to Egypt and worshiped the Queen of Heaven, another goddess? And people wonder why, yeah, it's hard to live in a time of judgment. And unless we had the Bible, we wouldn't realize how much the wide road deserves it, how much we deserved it, until God changed our heart and realized that by believing in our heart, confessing with our mouth that Jesus is Lord, we can be adopted as co-heirs into the family of God. Not many people believe that. Well, we're going to be getting into this, Angela, And I'm going to take the position contrary that Joshua did not blow it. And I'm going to beg you, please, Angie, Angela, stay with me and give me a chance to prove it, that Joshua actually warned them, look, it's not looking good for you guys. You should maybe not double down. God is giving you a chance right out. If you want to go serve those other gods, go serve them. And they said, oh no, we'll serve Yahweh. We'll serve our Titan God because he brought us this far. Let's go back. We'll have to go forward to the time of Joshua, the very last chapter, chapter 24. As we swing down here, we're going to find out that many people, and by I mean many, I mean almost everyone, until the Lord showed it to me and I'm pointing it out to you, this whole choose whom you will serve, very important for money-making Christians, you know. And he does say it, choose this day. You know, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve. Whether the gods your father served in the region beyond the river, now were they serving idols? No. Before they were following Yahweh, they were serving other gods, not the creator gods, but gods that were, we don't know, powers and principalities seem pretty strong, but they, you know, you can choose Yahweh, or you serve the gods of your fathers. What is it going to be? You know, choose who you're going to serve, the gods of your father, whom you will serve. When you dwelled with those other gods, Elohe, the God of Shem, the God of heaven, the God of Abraham, foreign gods that are among you. Put away these foreign Elohim that are among you. It's not put away the strange idols, it's put away strange Elohim. And people go, you know that Elohim means plural. No, it means a singular Elohim. There are many of them. The Bible teaches it. It cannot be more clear if you have eyes to see it and accept it and understand it and say that's what the Bible shows. We're looking at Elohim. Shocking, I know. Tell me, I did this for 35 years before I even got an inkling that anything was up besides the mainstream story. I thought it was a capitalistic race. Where'd we go here now? Here's the verse. You probably have heard it in the New International Version. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, that's if serving Yahweh seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the other Elohims your ancestors served, because they all, you know, there was a time when it was divided to them. And Jesus was the one where they didn't appoint a king. They didn't need a king. They had the law. Whether the Elohim your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates or the Elohim of the Amorites in whose lands you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. And there's your plaque. Continuing now in verse 16, the warning from Joshua. And looking at it, though, Joshua is already warning them. Now therefore fear the Lord and serve him sincerely and faithfully, and in faithfulness. Put away the Elohim that your fathers served. And then if it's evil in your eyes, choose this day. As for me and my house. And the people answered, far be it from us that we should forsake Yahweh to serve the other Elohim, for it is Yahweh, our Elohim, who brought us and our fathers up from the land of Egypt. And Yahweh drove out before us all the people, the Amorites. Therefore we will serve Yahweh, for he is our Elohim. Now, did Joshua fail them, or did he warn them according to as the God taught him? But Joshua said to the people, you are not able to serve the Lord, for he is a holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not forgive your transgressions or your sins. If you forsake Yahweh and serve other Elohim, then Yahweh will turn and do you harm and consume you after having done you good of getting them out of Egypt. And the people said to Joshua, no, but we serve Yahweh. Then Joshua said to the people, you are witnesses against yourselves that you have chosen Yahweh to serve him. And they made it legal by saying, we are witnesses. He said, then put away the other Elohim and that people are serving among you, and incline your heart to Yahweh, the God of Israel. And the people of Joshua said to Joshua, Yahweh is our Elohim, we will serve, and his voice we will obey. And so they built a monument to them, with a large stone underneath a oak tree or something like it. And those stones are going to bear witness just like all stones bear witness. And that's what Joshua did. Now the next chapter is how it starts out. They continue going in. Joshua and everything goes good while he and Caleb are still alive, those who survived and crossed over. Interesting things were crossing over. At this point, the men of Judah fought against Jerusalem, captured it, struck it with the edge of the sword. These things happened. They were the sea people. They cleared out the land. They came from nowhere. Boom. Hey, how you like us now? God said we could have it. What else could have motivated them to do this? And the sea people also. So it was time, for the descendants to draw lots and let's go. Let's go fight. Joshua went in. Judah went and did it. He got it going on. Simeon did it. But they had to help each other. Joseph went up, and the Lord was with him. He had spies, used spies, show us how to get into Star Fort. He showed him a thing. He struck him with the edge, and he let that man go. It was the land of the Hittites. But Manasseh did not drive out the inhabitants of Beth Shean. Nor the villages of these other places, or the inhabitants of Megiddo. And doesn't Megiddo, if you followed here now, and there's you know that Megiddo plays into our future very big in Gog and Magog. There's already been the Armageddon in you know, there is that one last thing that's going on. He was addressing the tribes right before they went in to the promised land. And he warned them, you know, if you want to back out because they had the idea they were murmuring a lot. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Now in Judges, let's just see how the other tribes did, because that's who Joshua was warning. And then the other tribes, how they do. Well, Ephraim did not drive out the Canaanites. Did that come back and bite them? Zebulun did not drive out the inhabitants of Kitron. Asher did not drive out the inhabitants. Naphtali, ditto. Amorites pressed the people of Dan back into the hill country, for they did not allow them to come down to the path. The Amorites persisted in dwelling in Mount Heres, in Ahalon, and in Shalabim, but the hand of the house of Joseph rested heavily on them, and they became subject to forced labor. Well, that's not exactly what was supposed to happen. It gets worse in chapter 2. Now the angel of the Lord went up from Galgal to Bochim, and he said, I brought you up from Egypt and brought you into the land that I swore to give your fathers. I said, I will never break my covenant with you, and you shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of this land. You shall break down their altars, but you have not obeyed my voice. What is this you have done? So now I say, I will not drive them out before you, but they shall become thorns in your sides, and their gods shall be a snare to you. Will we see Strong's 430? And it is their Welahim, a one-time usage, an added prefix to Elohim. Used 2,326 times to mean God in the New American Standard Translation. One time divine being, exceedingly gods. What is that one verse chapter where it says that Joshua sees the commander of the Lord of hosts? Did I just lose a connection? It sounded like something. Right. I knew we were on the same page. I just knew it. But that doesn't help me remember what I was looking up. No, I'm just kidding. That's supposed to be my job anyway. Where is that? Look at this. What is this one? Is this that mathematical coincidence stuff? They were just driving me nuts with that. You know, it's going to be right there. Is that how you spell commander? Oh, I misspelled host. I thought my odds are what I would have misspelled commander. So We're looking for the verse in Judges. Joshua 5 is what I meant to say. Because I want to show you that that's Jesus too. Verse 13, when Joshua was by Jericho, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and beheld a man was standing before him with his drawn sword in his hand. This is a Bene, a male individual. And Joshua went to him and said to him, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" "No, but I am the commander of the army of the Lord." Probably Michael. Michael stands up. Neither, it said. Yahweh, the army, their commander of his, any commander of any army. But when you're commander of Yahweh's, captain of the bodyguard, you know, if Jesus would have needed him with those 10,000 legions of angels that could have rescued him, they would have called this guy, because he was serving the incarnate spirit God in the flesh. It's always going to be Yahweh, Jehovah. The Titan who could create was probably Yahweh. The captain that was able to address the size of Joshua was probably Jehovah. There's other times when he showed up, you know, like Melchizedek. When he shows up there, that is a real person. You know, these Bible things happened, and we believe them, and we love them, and we don't make excuses for them. When we see that, who did Melchizedek serve? He brought him bread and wine because he was the priest of this person. And blessed be Abraham by this God Most High, single person. So this is when God in the flesh, Melchizedek, shows up and gets paid tithes and basically priest, wine and bread, brought it out from the city of peace. Melchizedek, he was the king, and he served Lael, the God Most High. Possessor of heaven and earth. It's always going to be the God, the Most High God, the Spirit God, the Creator God. Now the sea people, we went over that a little bit, didn't we? Didn't I have some sea people stuff going? You ever see this? It's always with these proofs that are incredibly, you know, ingenious and make things easy. But how did they just keep getting missed for hundreds of years? Look at, it's kind of interesting. It's while I watched it. One plus 2 plus 3 equals 6. Well, so does 1 times 2 times 3. It equals 6. And in Heron's formula, when you publish it towards knots, which is our analemma Mobius strips, to me, this is where it clicked, because I know people always think that, you know, I don't know what you guys think.
As indicated, the three touching points.
See how, but it breaks it down like this. When you have that circle inside a triangle, you get a 1, 2, 3. And it basically, here's your basic, your phi, your pi constant, your Fibonacci sequence. There you go. I know you got the golden triangle.
Split the size into segments of length 1, 2, and 3. 1 plus 2 is 3, 1 plus 3 is 4, and 2 plus 3 is 5. Also not terribly hard to check that this really works. Maybe one of you can do the check. So the sum R plus G plus P is equal to half the perimeter. And so
this Australian never seems to get surprised of how many proofs have been, you know, rediscovered. And believe it or not, this is, you know, this circle inside the triangle brought me to the knot theory and confirmed the infinite Mobius of analemma swastika operating in your body, which is a battery-powered torus. Some of it's kind of boring, but this is kind of interesting when they move it into crossing over.
Circle, right? We saw a circle earlier. And so the circles involved is a quadrilateral. I'd have guessed that it's an in circle or something, touching both sides from the inside. But no, it's from the outside like this. Anyway, the quadrilateral formula definitely agrees with what we've done.
So this fits with the starting points of all knots should be considered, you know, where you'd start inside a circle.
Shrink D to 0, the quadrilateral turns into a triangle, and Brahma-Gupta.
Isn't this an awesome name, the Brahma-Gupta formula? Man, that's cool.
Formula turns into a Heron formula. Cool. Actually, Brahma-Gupta's formula looks even cooler if you write it in terms of the semi-perimeter of the quadrilateral.
We're not going to get into arguments about what type of thing looks cooler with these nerds. Trust me, you'll lose every time. Everything's got to get back into a cube. Pretty cool, huh? Look at all this info the mathologer puts in his videos. No wonder he almost has 1 million subscribers. There's the Cut the Knot site that I thought it was just fantastic. Did I look? I wonder if I have it pulled up. Another topic. They want you to run something on Google. Cut the knot. I'm sure that you don't want to see me go through this. I know you don't. I won't. What is this one? When the golden band let's look at the golden band in Ecclesiastes 12. Oh boy. Verse 6, before the silver cord is snapped, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher is shattered at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the cistern, and the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Vanity of vanity, says the preacher, all is vanity. You know that King James is, or ever the silver cord be loosed, or the golden bowl be broken. Before the dust returns to the ground from which it came, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. That dust, as we just talked the other day, up here, here, is 8 times out of the 110 usage. And it is what can be made into what you guys are all calling Jupiter, fake marble. That's a body part that, when collected and mixed right, is enough of, it's the plaster. It's the dust that we were made of, as I'll show you in un momento. For as much as I exalted thee out of the dust, not the Genesis chapter 1 creation. They were not made out of the dust. They were made in the image of, we'll look at the full word, Strong's Hebrew 6083, and it's 110%. They gave 110%. They used this word, the offer dry earth dust. And this is what our type, non-Nephilim humans were made of in Genesis chapter 2. Talked about us again, and the dust you shall eat, because that's a punishment for the person who got tricked by Satan to going down into believing that he could, impress the Satan by deceiving Eve. He'll be judged. You know they will. For you are dust. You'll return to that dust. Dust, dooby-doo, dust, dust. Exodus, in the beast, in the dust of the land. Smote struck the dust of the earth. Place stones of plaster, mortar, and you shall replaster, because you're going to be using, unhewn stones. The mortar of the house, the plaster of the house, the dust, ashes. Who can count the dust of Jacob? The fine dust, small dust. "21, the golden calf. And I took your sin, the calf which ye had made, and burnt it with fire, and stamped it, and ground it very small, until it was small as dust. And I cast the dust therefore into the brook that descended out of the mount." Moses knew how to not emulsify, but make colloidal gold, then dry it out and throw it away. And it was very angry, but it was that dust that you were made out of in Genesis chapter 2. We'll start at verse 4, wondering why, because this is, on the seventh day that God rested from that. And then now here's the generations and the creation of, well, not a it is, because in recreated world that was voided, there were great titans, and then there was whatever we're going to be looking at that would comprise a situation possible, because we love and trust Scripture so much. We don't knee-jerk reject it. We knee-jerk accept it. And if we say we trust the Bible, we know that one time there was a day when the sons of Elohim came to present themselves before Yahweh, because he was the creator Elohim, the Zeus type of that situation, when the synagogue of Satan tries to repaint it as a Greek fairy tale, not as a biblical truth. We'll look at verse 6 quickly to reinforce that with you, because it was a time when, before to present themselves, the Bene, the male identified angels, all angels identify as Bene type Elohim, and they came to present themselves before Yahweh. And Ha-Satan was there, one of the Ha-Elohim. Hello, Ha-Elohim. Walked with God and the sons of Elohim, the sons of an Elohim, the sons of an Elohim, the sons of, Noah walked with the Yahweh, that Elohim, the good one. Abraham prayed to that God, that Elohim, made a covenant with him, and that Elohim sticks to it, because he was not Zeus, Jesus, the true God, the incarnate of God in the flesh. Maker of the Mobius strip, analemma, battery operated torus, and a swastika type movement, using infinite amount of analemma Mobius strips, just becoming so clear to me all the time when you see it. It's not just a Mobius strip where you do a unknot. If that was flat, you could flip it. But if it was a, it could be an easy Mobius strip. You just invert it. And then you'd have this, where 3 could cross, 4, 5, 6, 7, and many, many more. Let's look at a few pictures of a knot invariant. You will see that there are many, many more possibilities. Oh, there's a paywall. Ooh, that looks good. Oh. Taurus knot. Look at that. Thank you, Lord. That is a Taurus. I'm going to save a few of these because I have a feeling I could make a little video talk about the Lord. I just don't like the black and white stripe idea of it. Oh yeah. I got to see that. That's pretty big. Now where did it go? So I think that was worth it a little bit. I like it. Now, nothing is impossible for the Lord. Imagine all of the times the thing's spinning in between the center of this one and the next one and the one after that. Pick one spot and follow it. Maybe on this one. Pick a spot and follow it. Analema Mobius strip. Boom, bada, boom, bop, pow. That's fun. That's fun. The dust. Most High God. So that's the Most High. 32 times, priest of the Most High, God Most High. It's who it is. You know, why would it say you shall have no other Elohim before me? We need to nail down also that they did go back to Egypt. They wanted to go back to Egypt. They cried about it. And a group of them did go back to Egypt. Here's something sad. Oh, I'll read it. Never mind. We'll go over it later. The end of the Lamentations is so sad because he realized, have you forsaken us forever? No reply from God. Uh-huh, kinda. Jeremiah 44. Pick up the context here because I can't go over it really good. But it starts out in verse 13. I will punish those who dwell in the land of Egypt. Verse 14, so that none of the remnant of Judah who have come back to live in the land of Egypt shall escape or survive. Verse 15, then all the men who knew that their wives had made offerings to other, is it say idols? They choose to capitalize when Yahweh is an Elohim, but they don't capitalize it when the other gods that their wives were serving are Elohim, that also made covenants with their gods, you know, their people, who were not the Hebrews, who didn't need a king. But among many things that drove Yahweh crazy was their demand for a king. The Most High, I'm sure, was not pleased. So they did go back to Egypt. United States, in my world, but we will do everything we have vowed. They're very religious. We vowed to make offerings to the Queen of Heaven and pour out drink offerings to her, as we did, both we and our fathers. So it wasn't a one-time thing. They learned it. Fathers millstoned them. Their kings did it. Their officials did it. Fathers, kings, and officials, right in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem. And they gave the credit to those gods who, like your great or your grandfather who's old now, going like, we're the greatest generation, doggone it. I guess so. That's what they tell us, Grandpa. Amazing work you did there. You know, getting 3.5 years of war when you never had a company that combined could produce 230 torpedoes a year. Supposedly you had torpedoes on every ship, but no, you didn't. Everything was alive. They poured out drink offerings to them and there. And we still wonder, you know, it was Mudflood Armageddon? Where's those videos on the sea peoples? I showed this a little bit earlier, but this is a very good overview. And this might even be a good one too. Quick overview.
Do not include reference to a migration. The sea peoples are conjectured to have sailed around the eastern Mediterranean and invaded Anatolia, Syria, Phoenicia, Canaan, Cyprus, and Egypt toward the end of the Bronze Age. French Egyptologist Emmanuel de Rouge first used the term Couples de la Mer in 1855 in a description of reliefs on the second pylon at Medinet Habu documenting year 8 of Ramesses III. Gaston Maspero, de Rouge's successor at the College de France, subsequently popularized the term sea peoples in an associated migration theory in the late 19th century.
That's the late 1800s when they first popularized it, came up with it. Let's present it to the people now.
The narrative stems primarily from 7 ancient Egyptian sources, and although in these inscriptions the designation of the sea does not appear in relation to all of these peoples, the term sea peoples is commonly used in modern publications to refer to the following 9 peoples, in alphabetical order. The Medinet Habu inscriptions from which the sea peoples concept was first described remain the primary source and the basis of virtually all significant discussions of them. Amongst them are some of the sea
that I have chosen poorly.
Are some of the following things that were not.
I'm going to save this video.
Are some of the following.
Refugees of the Santori event? And the Lost History Channel puts out great stuff. Now, they talk about the great earthquake 2 years before. I hope you guys are having a great Lord's Day and chatting with your friends and learning and praying and blessing the name of Jesus.
We keep referring to the Santorini eruption with good reason. This singular event is responsible for a hell of a lot more than we have ever realized. From this singular episode in history, connections can be made to the biblical narrative of Moses. Plato refers to it as Atlantis, and the Pharaoh of Egypt immortalizes
Of course.
this event on the Tempest Stela, and describes it as the gods being displeased because at a distance of 600 miles away from the epicenter, the ancient civilization had no idea it was the eruption of the atomic volcano Thera, and the Bronze Age collapsed as a result. But it doesn't stop there. On the island of Santorini, the city dwellings contain many things, including a massive array of pottery with the legendary concentric circles as a representation of the island's original appearance. But in these preserved ruins, something is missing. There aren't any human remains like what we have seen at Pompeii, for example, and this means that the island was evacuated prior to the eruption taking place. The Minoans, of course, had a vast empire that included most of the islands of Greece and the main land. And it is possible that out of desperation to seize resources, they waged a war with Egypt. It isn't documented properly because the timeline of our understanding of the past is completely all over the place on the matter. For example, from the reign of Ahmose I, when this event at Santorini was documented, it's separated by a couple of hundred years before they attacked Egypt first under the rule of Merneptah, then under the rule of Ramses III. These people are referred to as the Sea Peoples because it is unclear who they were, only that they came by sea and invaded much of the region. This would have been the actions of a once mighty empire that that were displaced by the cataclysm of the Thera eruption eventually rebuilt.
Yeah, well, they had 10 plagues against Egypt. I guess you could consider that a battle of spiritual proportions that was recognized around the world. Look at, you know, and thank you all for sticking around. I'm going to mark my spot right there. Think of Rahab, the fear of you. We heard about you who came out of the Red Sea, and they're afraid of you. They're afraid of you. There were other countries pretending they came from, oh, we're just way far away from you, but please don't take us over. And they tricked them into signing a contract covenant with them. And whenever you think about lumberjacks, those were the people that were said, look, don't kill us. We'll work for you. We want to be your servants. Just don't kill us, because they knew the people that came out of the Red Sea had, at their first stop, they were kicking giants' butt, full-blown Nephilim types. Boom, pow, wow, that's crazy. Hey, guess what came in the mail finally yesterday? I got sacred tobacco seeds. So Mr. Tommy is motivated to start growing tobacco. How cool is that? Sea people. The great mystery of all academy. Look, when you look up the sea people, all you're going to get is me fishing around. No. You'll see that it's the same people we're talking about. Supposedly a confederation, maybe of 12 tribes. First off, did in Egypt, and then everywhere prior to and during the late Bronze Age collapse. And the late Bronze Age collapse is the period that a great big flood happened, and they discovered, hey, look at all of these old star forts. Look at these old canals. Look at the old, and everybody got interested in religion again. And then they prophesied about John the Baptist, then Jesus. And then the God-fearing Greeks reminded them, we've been waiting on this Messiah a long time. The Medes and the Persians probably said, look, the Messiah is coming. We know when he's going to be born. That's why. And then the Zoroastrians, the Medes, the Persians told them, go ahead. Why do you think we paid for them to rebuild the temple? Well, Xerxes found out when he married Esther that the Jews really were the chosen ones. That was the God that ruled, the creator God. So they had the God-fearing Greeks still, who was one of the most famous, the man that they said, I haven't seen faith like this. He was a God-fearing Greek who the Jews said, oh, please help this man. He built our synagogue for us. And those Star Fort synagogues are pretty darn nice, right? Anything in the Star Fort was good. And they can take anything Star Fort and make it a synagogue. Or if they built it and they said now it's a church, they could just throw some embellishments on it. So let's keep going. Happy Lord's Day to you.
And looking to prosper once again. In Egyptian text, they are described as a group of Greeks from Anatolia, ancestors of the Etruscans. Anatolia would have been where the people of Santorini may have been evacuated to prior to the eruption. They regrouped and established.
Let's just look at it as they're, this guy's probably going to go back to Atlantis. Who knows? But something was happening, and they do try to pass it off as white man world. Atlantis, don't they?
Was in full flow, and the collapse was complete. But on the ashes of the Bronze Age, the descendants of the Santorini residents would rise again. From Troy in the northwest to Ugarit on the coast of Syria and southwest to the Nile Delta, unidentified attackers razed and burned international trade centers and port cities. After
You know what? Or maybe it was when all of Asia departed Paul. This one, you know, remember this one, these, I've only ever had two visions to point me in the right direction. The rest has had to have been discerned line upon line. So I'm thinking one thing, but I'm having a nagging doubt about what if it's that other thing?
souls, most of the shattered cities were either abandoned or
By the other thing, I mean Armageddon.
only on an insignificant scale. All across the eastern Mediterranean, civilizations that had been shaped by aristocrats and became societies of herdsmen and shepherds. When the fighting was over, entire languages and scripts had vanished. This sudden collapse is one of the most dramatic events in the history of the Mediterranean.
And I think they use it to cover up a lot of things. Say, well, it's just those crazy sea people nobody understands.
Of the political collapses. Were the sea people conquerors, pirates, deserters, or refugees? We suggest this was all the result of the Santorini eruption. The displacement of the people eventually led to the taking place at the time, and make no mistake, the story we get today from the ancient happenings is in that of ancient propaganda. But that is all there is left, unfortunately, because the victors write history of their victories, not of their opponents' struggle. It is up to us to understand the past. All of us, not the few, but the many. The sea peoples were refugees equipped with the means. The Tempest Stela described what happened in Egypt after the eruption, but this was no way known to anyone at the time. The refugees from the fallout would have become a new civilization. This was a time of chaos and of fortification. The place is not accurate in any manner, and to establish why all this took place in the first place, then you must consider an event so massive, so drastic, that it forced an entire civilization to move countries. It isn't an accurate account, but the overview of these things makes more sense than the squeezing and dismissal.
Well, you know, they don't know what they're doing. Do we know what we're doing? I had a Sea People's thing here.
The entire Mediterranean region, over the entire Aegean Sea, and indeed across the Mediterranean. In the years of the Mycenaean period, roughly from 1600 to 1100 or so BC, you are dealing with a largely unified culture. What is it? What do we talk about the world like these days? What's the cliche? Globalized world. It was a globalized world, except it was a little piece of the globe.
This is the late Bronze Age, and actually the Bronze Age goes from 3000 to 1000 BC, give or take. And we're in that last part of it. The way you make bronze, as I put up here, is tin and copper, right? 90% copper, 10% tin. Most of the copper is used to make bronze at that time. The copper is not a problem. It's coming from Cyprus. In fact, that's where the word comes from. Kypros, Cyprus, means copper. The tin is a little bit more problematic. Possible some came from Cornwall, though I rather doubt they got up there more than once on the blue moon. There are some tin mines in southern Turkey.
Once in a blue moon is still like 3 times every 2 years.
But not enough. The vast majority came from Afghanistan. So you can see that you've got a trade route of hundreds, if not thousands of miles. If you cut it at any point, you are indeed in trouble. And in fact, a colleague of mine in England has said that for them, tin was like oil is for us, right? And that keeping the steady flow of tin is the same problem that we've got for oil. And I think that's a pretty good analogy. So we've got this globalized society, trade, reciprocity, diplomacy. Everybody's marrying each other's daughters for gold and silver and whatnot. And then into it, you drop a little chaos. And suddenly you've got a big, big problem. They lose the art of writing. They lose the art of large buildings. You get a dark age, right? So Mycenaean civilization is considered to end just after 1200.
Okay, so now you see where your discernment is necessary. We'll skip his little propaganda.
That only happens when something very, very large drives people away from an inhabited site.
We get a dark age that lasts for between 150 and 300 years, and basically civilization has to reboot in this area.
Oh no, man. You got to reboot. What comes after, we got, all of these things in the last one where the feet fell apart, and we know that they invented it after the Bronze Age collapsed, when Jesus was famous from his whole life. And eventually, how did they check to see that he was already dead? They had a spear with an iron tip. So we know they had iron. How do you get iron? The reason, and we know they had, there was a time when knowledge will increase. Well, that was for them. In our time, they're releasing the stuff that we get now. Back then, they were discovering it because their languages had been confounded and they were working up to their situation. How do they find the, what is, and you see that they had a hard time finding tin. So I'm going to remember the word Bessemer. And let you know that there really is only one way to make iron, and then its derivatives of steel. And that's what you would have called an industrial revolution, possibly allowing them the transportation to, well, let's just let you decide what could happen once you learn how to move from those different stages of, to where it's going to be iron and then it's mixed with clay. It's going to all come together for you right now. I'm going to be praying for you the whole time. Everything back at this time was when we were a fascist government. This might as well be a hammer and a sickle. Safety, efficiently, mineral industries, we all work together. That's why there's a Bureau of the Interior, Bureau of the Mine. Bureau of Mines under the Department of the Interior. They're really into introductions, aren't they?
And conveniences, giving us a standard of living that's the admiration of the world. Steel, our nation's strong right arm, on the land, in the sky, on the water, for the preservation of our nation, our form of government, our American way of life. Whence comes this mighty giant called steel? Steel is the result of man's ingenuity in utilizing one of nature's greatest gifts, iron ore, which primarily is the metal iron firmly combined with the gas oxygen. The first iron used by man was no doubt meteoric iron that had fallen from the sky, such as this specimen. It was used mostly for ornaments. The early Egyptians called it metal from heaven. No one knows definitely how iron was made in prehistoric times, but to see how it might have been done, let's take a look at one of the known primitive methods. A crude furnace.
Now, really, how primitive is this? For a hunter-gatherer to have experimented to know you need a conical shaped chimney. This is industrial on a small scale. A small opening at the bottom to feed a fire of enriched oxygen, giving it time to separate before it leaves. How much of primitive is that? How much experimentation does it take? No matter how you dress it up with a primitive background, would you have persisted in baking rocks looking for something?
Was made of clay with the top open.
Charcoal is added to the process of developing charcoal is what happened. I know you're not tree lovers or tree huggers, but you have to burn a whole lot of acreage to get a couple of tons of charcoal.
Through the top, the furnace was charged with charcoal.
Another process that is nowhere near caveman knowledge.
To cause the fire to burn more freely, an air blast was provided by bellows made of flexible animal skins. Elevating the upper part of the bag permitted air to enter through a hole in the top. After it was inflated, pressing down on it forced air into the furnace through hollow wooden tubes. By operating the every 4 or 5 hours, the tapping hole is opened and out rushes a glowing stream of molten iron, termed in the industry hot metal. Sometimes this hot metal is poured into molds, and the resulting pig iron shipped to foundries for casting. But usually the fiery...
No more Bronze Age, and it came pretty fast.
Returning to the hot mill, we see other slabs being made into steel plates. First, they go through a series of roughing stands. The finishing stands complete the reduction, and we have plates from 3/16 to 3/4 inch in thickness. Powerful end shears cut plates of the desired length. Steel plate is indispensable for storage tanks, pipelines, gas holders, boilers, and similar construction. For railway cars, ships, and hundreds of other industrial applications. Next, we see an ingot of different shape and size that it...
Unlike most inventors, he managed to bring his own projects to fruition and profited financially from their success. Bessemer's father, Anthony, was born in London into a Huguenot family, but moved to Paris when he was 21 years old. He was an inventor who, while engaged by the Paris Mint, made a machine for making medallions that could produce steel dies from a larger model. He became a member of the French Academy of Science for his The invention from which Bessemer made his first fortune was a series of 6 steam-powered machines for making bronze powder, used in the manufacture of gold paint. As he relates in his autobiography, he examined the bronze powder made in Nuremberg, which was the only place where it was made at the time. He then copied and improved the product and made it capable of being made on a simple production line. It was an early example of reverse engineering, where a product is analyzed and then reconstituted. The process was kept secret, with only members of his immediate family having and designing furnaces, which was to be of great use for his new steel-making process. Henry Bessemer worked on the problem of manufacturing cheap steel for ordnance production from 1850 to 1855 when he patented his method. On August 24, 1856, Bessemer first described the process to a meeting of the British Association in Cheltenham, which he titled The Manufacture of Iron Without Fuel. It was published in full in the Times. The Bessemer process involved using oxygen and air blown through molten pig iron to burn off the impurities and thus create steel. James Nasmith says to 5 ironmasters, but from the outset, the companies had great difficulty producing good quality steel. Mr. Johan Fredrik Göransson, a Swedish ironmaster, using the pure charcoal pig iron of that country, was the first to make good steel by the process, but only after many attempts. His results prompted Bessemer to try a purer iron obtained from Cumberland.
So you see, they knew they needed charcoal. They needed those high temperatures, but it still was failing. They could make planes. And remember, look at this process. This guy managed to keep this secret, and everybody wanted it. So he ended up forcing have to do it. Sometimes there's wars over different ways people were processing things. And that's what steel is. And when did we really reach the modern age? Let's just see. When did people really understand the process of how to extrude metal? What were the real upgrades? When did history become rewritten? Start paying attention. We're not going to watch very much of this video. But when did steel? Was it when they rewrote our history and the mafias took over and said, here's your story, we're running it by this computer designed story? Not to fool everyone, but just to fool a wide road. What was World War II about those 3 years? Did they have to say, hey, some reset organization's not sharing how to extrude metal, and they blame it on World War II like everything else? Who wrote the history?
Something disturbing. The planes contained parts which were far more advanced than anything the Allies had. In your life, too. During World War II, when the Allies examined shot down German planes, they noticed something disturbing. The planes contained parts which were far more advanced than anything the Allies had. These parts were huge forgings, basically large pieces of metal which had been squeezed under tremendous pressure in a press, sort of like a gigantic waffle iron. These large forgings.
So do you see the difference that when the United Rosie the Riveters, they were riveting every plane, everything, because they didn't know how to do what the Germans were doing. So it took all of these steps in the United States, but they had to pay for it. So for reparations, they were able to bring back 3 giant presses. And now the world is happy because they started, the world had access to them.
Has made much of the advanced Cold War military machinery possible and have been a key component of national security. There's no way we'd have such advanced aircraft with amazing capabilities without these presses. When you think of the Cold War, you think of fighter and bomber jets, nuclear missiles, spaceships.
Right, because that's what they tell us, right? Absolutely unbelievable. There can be no other reason. They ended up some going to the Soviet Union, some going there, because it was an industrial revolution, because Satan was loosed.
Hello and welcome to this first video in the Industrial Revolution section of our year, and this is part one, the origins and features of this revolution. Now, the Industrial Revolution began in England and it spread to the rest of Western Europe and the United States. With the Industrial Revolution came an increased demand for raw materials from Africa, Asia, and the Americas. Advancements in technology produced the Industrial Revolution, while advancements in science and medicine altered the lives of people living in the new industrial cities, and cultural changes soon followed. Right, so here's where it started. I'm just going to point this out. In the United Kingdom, this is where the Industrial Revolution started, the cradle of the Industrial Revolution. Like it's a baby. Started right here. And you can see why, because they've got these industrial areas. They were located right over places where you had access to the natural resources like coal and iron, or you had lots of people living in close quarters so that you could then create industrial products. But why did it start in England? It had a relatively stable government compared to other places on the European scene, but then it had a lot of really important natural resources. Like
it had a lot of secret societies working together.
You can see these core food and wool producing areas were then close to London, Birmingham, and some of these other later industrial, and a number of other techniques to create this steel in ways that hadn't been done before, using the iron and coal and stuff that they had from the Industrial Revolution. Here's some medical advances. It's a smallpox vaccine by Edward Jenner, and that killed smallpox, eventually totally died out in the 20th century. But that also allowed people to live a lot longer and allowed infants and young children to live longer, which led to a population increase. And same thing, bacteria. The discovery of bacteria by Louis Pasteur allowed for pasteurization and a number of other techniques that cut down on the number of people dying from infectious disease. And that was a big deal, and that allowed more population increase. So the food production plus the medical advances, population explosion. So here's the feedback loop. This is what I mean by this. Follow me along this line of thought. New technology led to more food, which led to increased population, which led to urbanization, which then led to increased education.
Which led to blah, 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 which led to a rewrite of history, which led that, you know, we covered yesterday how, and we're wrapping up, and, you know, it was World War II. It was racism. It was, you know, why did Japan attack? They weren't considered white. Why did Italy quit the war? Well, they were classified non-Jewish, but they weren't considered Aryans. And everything is as recent as they're faking World War II. What is a good thing to close on at 2 hours and 37 minutes to tie it up with a bow? What was happening in those eras? 43. Let's just go with the spirit here. Oh. Lucky Luciano Freed. I can search that and make sure, you know, I can tell you, I am familiar that, you know, he was running the mob. They did have mafia, regardless of what J. Edgar Hoover said until he died, that there wasn't. But there was, and he was the boss of bosses. And eventually, you know, well, he was deported to Italy because he was used to provide intelligence to the army and a promise that they would stop blowing up the boats in New York Harbor because they're working with the Nazis at that time. Well, they showed him, you know, here, you know, you can be free, don't have to do the Nazis. And once you make a deal with the mafia, you know, they let him out. He was the guy who reorganized the Costa Nostra, planned it all. took a stand and said, if I go to jail, things are going to be breaking down all over the harbors, and they did. He got out of prison, even though he was running it from there. In World War II, it says they were worried about sabotage. They were living with it. They were dealing with it. And so they ended up commuting his sentence, setting him free, and the United States collaborated with the mafia in Operation Underworld, in which people from the mafia were on the tanks leading the invasion of Italy, because they couldn't have the #1 ships in the whole world being blown up in New York Harbor. So they made a deal with the mafia. And things continued, a mafia war, until the United States ended up passing the 1958 Educational Act that demanded certain rules be followed. If you want to get any more money from any government in the world, because they were all in the United Nations and everything else, and you know, the 1958 Educational Act brought in DARPA and NASA and the STEM program, their search for the genetic geniuses. And anybody who wants to receive this money for testing, NASA, anything, these payments have to be followed. Oh, I'm only on 6. So how to carry out the provisions of the new, Educational Act. There's going to be a little bit of a committee work. If you want your vocational money, where to teach, what to do, all the money, the forms appropriated. Now, just give me a second. Science info, miscellaneous provisions. That's what they call it. And if you want any money, you're going, so after all of this about the money, no part of any funds can go to anybody if that individual has not executed and filed with the commissioner an affidavit that he does not believe in and is not a member of and does not support any organization that believes in or teaches the overthrow of the United States government by force or violence. I'll read it without the other things. Everybody, whoever's going to work for the government or get money from them, has to present executed and filed with the commissioner an affidavit that he does not believe in the overthrow of the United States government by force or any other illegal or unconstitutional method. And once you have taken that, you will raise your right arm, subscribe to the oath, and affirm the following. I do solemnly swear that I will bear witness to this, that there has been no takeover, that I will defend the Constitution because it hasn't been taken over, and I'm going to pretend it hasn't been taken over and follow the laws of this true government that hasn't been taken over by the mob. Now, if anyone out there, or if you know anyone out there that has a more coherent theory, even if it is biblical based, send them my way. I want somebody to try to poke holes in this. because there's nothing about this going to get better. We're working towards a big separation where we're going to be separated from the people that love those 5G towers. And if you're not, you're going to explain to your kids, well, you got to get vaxxed. You got to do this. You got to do that. Maybe we'll make some tin foil hats from at night, but the rest of the time you're going to be poisoned in your brain. And that's the truth on Flat Earth Nation, because Mudflood was Armageddon. Men, real quick prayer. If you're going to take off your hats, women, you know I like the Mennonite bonnets. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this chance to share. I pray, Heavenly Father, that people will appreciate the Lord's Day. I pray that our minds will be focused on Jesus Christ. I pray, Heavenly Father, that you will help prepare me for any future debates I have in the areas of theology and timelines. Prepare my heart, O God, to give you the glory we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Reminder, it's a Flat Earth Nation. You know, I'm never going to tell you anything else. Neither are my friends. Why would we? We're trying to prove that we have your best interest at heart. Amen. Hallelujah. Aho. I'll leave the chat room open because that was kind of a surprise ending for a few minutes, where you can say your goodbyes. Amen. Hallelujah. Aho.